Amen. Please be seated, and I welcome those who are watching by live stream and tape recording. So, fire has a tendency to go out. If you and I do not tend to fires, if we stoke them and put on new wood and new energy, fires do have a tendency to go out. You may remember the second law of thermodynamics. There is a process in all reality that if you do not tend to that which has heat and energy, then it will dissipate, what scientists call entropy. The second law of thermodynamics says if you do not tend to heat and energy, then you will lose it. It will go out, and you can never get it back again. That's not only true of physical fire, but it's also true of other kinds of aspects in our life. Take the fire of knowledge. You may have, during your schooling, either undergrad or graduate school, you may have worked really hard to memorize some equation, some evaluation, some piece of history, or maybe a long section of Chaucer, and you had it. I mean, it was sealed, and you went in and you aced that exam. Now let me ask you, how much of that do you now remember? If you and I don't stoke the fires of knowledge, if we don't bring them new energy, then they'll dissipate. You and I will lose them and lose the knowledge. It's also true in art and music and sports. Those of you who draw or paint, those of you who sing or play a musical instrument, or those of you who might play a sport, you know that if you do not take your natural skills and work with them and develop them and practice with them, then you will lose those skills. They will dissipate. I love the interview with Pablo Casals, the famous cellist. The interviewer had a conversation with him when he was 92. He said, "Dr. Casals, I noticed that you're still practicing the cello 4 hours a day. Why do you do such a thing at 92? He said, I think I'm still gaining on it." It's true also in the fires of relationships, isn't it? You and I can once upon a time fall in love with someone, a partner or a spouse, someone in your family, a good friend. You might have a love that abounds, but if you don't tend to it, if you don't stoke the fire, if you don't spend time in cultivating that love one with another, then that fire will go out. And of course, if this is true in these other aspects, it's also true with the fires of faith. Once upon a time, you and I were baptized. For me, it was an infant, maybe for you as well. Sometime as you reached the age of 12 or so, you might have been confirmed, as I was. Just because we've been baptized and confirmed, even if we've been going and part of the church from time to time, if we don't tend to the fires of faith, you know what happens. Those coals go cold. It dissipates. It's a diminishing energy. The fires of faith can also go out. And so in our epistle text for today, the grand old wise Apostle Paul is writing to his young friend Timothy. He said, "Timothy, now I know that you received a vigilant, vigorous faith from your mother Eunice, from your grandmother Lois, and a faith that resides in you now. But I want you," he says, with all kinds of determination, "to rekindle the faith that is within you." Paul could have added on to that because the fires of faith can go out. Do you know that 70% of Americans declare that they have some type of living faith? Now, let me also ask us, when you see the behaviors of most of our society, does it cause you to think that some of the flames of faith fire have gone out? If 70% of our population says that they are a convinced Christian, let me ask you, how's your flame doing these days? How's the fire of your own faith? Is it receiving the stoking and the tending that it needs? How is it then, if we were to join young Timothy, that you and I could see about rekindling the faith that is within us? The first aspect that I'd like to name about rekindling the faith for any of us, all of us, is the gift of memory. To remember. Jesus said it often, didn't he? Do this in remembrance of me when you go out and live as a disciple, when you come forward to receive this holy meal. Do all of that, Jesus seems to be saying, in remembrance of me. And yet, sometimes the fire of our faith diminishes because we don't remember well. We forget at our peril. When I was in high school, I know this might be hard for you to believe, I was the rhythm guitarist in a high school rock and roll band. It was called Speed Limit 35. You can see that maybe we didn't let our hair down too much. You know, it could have been Speed Limit 55. I don't know where the name came from. Probably one of my buddies saw the first sign that he saw and said, "Hey, let's call ourselves Speed Limit 35. I got out my Fender electric guitar and played the rhythm. I know it's hard for you to believe this one played rhythm guitar, and that would be right for you to doubt that. It didn't last very long. We sang some of the great music of the mid-'60s, things like Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds, The Little Black Egg. Remember that? How about Wendy by the Association? What I remember about that rock and roll band is that we did a lot of forgetting. That is, the several dances that we played for, we couldn't remember the lyrics. It's pretty important when you play for a dance to remember the second and third verses of the songs you're singing. I remember a lot of humming. I love the story of the couples who had a dinner party, two couples. At the end of dinner, the ladies adjourned to go to the kitchen. The two older gentlemen were still at the dinner table, and they were having conversation. And one of them said to the other, "We went to the most fabulous restaurant last week. I commend it to you." He said, "What was the name of it?" He thought, was thinking some more, and he said, "What's that beautiful flower that we give to each other when we really love each other? You know, it's red and it has thorns." He said, "You mean a rose?" He said, "Yeah, that's it." He looked towards the kitchen. He said, "Rose! What's that restaurant where we went last week?" We forget at our demise. Jesus calls us to remember. What are we to remember? To remember all the ways that God has been working in our life up to now. Those times when we had a bad hair day, when life was going sideways, when relationships were on the rocks, when we weren't sure about our vocational life, when our finances were precarious, and we remember, oh, I remember now all the ways that God tended to me, giving me love and mercy and grace, restoration and forgiveness. Jesus wants us to remember the lyrics of rekindling our faith. remembering all the ways that God's grace has been part of us. As we just sang, it is an amazing grace that meets us in all of our conditions. A second way this morning that I'd like to name for rekindling our faith would be for each of us to take on some discipline. It takes a discipline to rekindle anything: your knowledge, relationships, music, sports, anything really. And I'd encourage us as Bethesda-by-the-Sea and each of us individually to take on a bit of a spiritual discipline to rekindle the faith. Let me name a few that would be a summary of our baptismal vows. First is I encourage all of us to practice the deepest possible hospitality. This is a beautiful place. You are an incredible community of people, attractive in so many ways. And one of the virtues that we have been given to rekindle our faith is to practice a deep hospitality. When people come our way, is to treat them as we would treat any of us, that they're part of the family, that they have belonging. There's a lot of loneliness out there. There's a lot of isolation and bruised people. They come our way. We are the community of faith of the one who offers mercy and love, to practice a deep hospitality. To be of this community and not just in it is the second feature I would name. To be of Palm Beach and Palm Beach County and this part of Florida, indeed beyond this county, in so many ways that you and I can reach out. To penetrate the love and mercy of God into what we do as a community of faith. That we don't just live here. We don't just exist and reside here. We don't just enjoy the bounty and beauty of Palm Beach. We are to be of this community, not just in it. Thirdly, to be theologically and biblically literate. Friends, I encourage you to study, read. When's the last time you opened the Scriptures and really studied it? Open that thick tome or some of those books that have been residing in your library that have, quite frankly, picked up a little bit of dust. I encourage you to get them out and to take on a discipline of study and reading to expand and enlarge your knowledge. Not just your knowledge, though, to be of the heart, to be literate in terms of biblical and theological material. There's all kinds of opportunity here to study the Scriptures and to be part of a book group and to take in, digest, inwardly digest the incredible material and resources that are available. To bear witness to the gospel with hope, to have a hope. Our world is desperate to hear hope these days. To have a group of people who are not only civil to each other, but have a sense of hope and fortitude in a society that seems to be falling apart, where people are really after each other with a mean spirit, that you and I would offer something different from that, something better. I call it transpartisanship, not just bipartisanship. The gospel's much better, isn't it, than a political ideology. Is to transpose some of those divisions that we have and to speak into those divisions as a community of hope. And the last is to, quite frankly, roll up your sleeves in joy and promise. There's a lot of opportunities here at Bethesda-by-the-Sea to be of really good for other people and to do it with joy. I would even say humor. We live in a humorless world. Ooh, it's lowbrow, serious, tough society. Is to bring some levity, lifting people's spirits, offering some appropriate humor in the midst of a very serious and forlorn society. Now, none of these aspects happen overnight. We don't just snap our fingers and rekindle the faith. You know how a fire works. You have to tend it, stoke it, bring new wood and new energy to it, and it doesn't happen immediately. We have to keep working at it to have the long view. You may know the poet Robert Frost. Robert Frost was working and working and working on what he thought was going to be his epic poem, was going to be the hallmark of his life, the premier piece of work. He was exhausted one afternoon, decided he needed to take a break because this was not going as well as he wanted to. So he took a walk through the woods near his house. When he got back, there was some scratch paper near where he was working. As sort of a throwaway, he wrote down, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, and I have miles to go before I sleep. I have miles to go before I sleep." Tossed it off to the side. As he began to continue to do his work, he discovered that this surprising verse, which was scratched out on a little side piece of paper, became the hallmark of his entire work of poetry. The woods are lovely and dark and deep, and we have miles to go before we sleep. He says it again. We have miles to go before we sleep. People of Bethesda-by-the-Sea, I have news for you. You have miles to go before you sleep. God has a great plan for this parish. You have resources abounding. You're talented, smart, can I say also good looking. You have reservoirs and resources that run deep. You have an exquisite campus. You have a deep and abiding history. And now you're ready to welcome a new rector. There are so many possibilities for this congregation. And there's a world of hurt out there and in here. The woods are lovely. You are dark and deep. And we have miles to go before we sleep. Amen.